So we're finding the grave now. We can't find it because it's all grown over. You can see for yourself. So we're looking for the Commonwealth soldiers who fight in the battles. It's all grown now, so there's a problem. The guy's trying to look for it. Right. We're looking for it, we can't find it.
It's on the path edge, so it should be easy enough to find. It's definitely not this far down. Where's he gone? I don't know. I think I'm looking for water correctly. Yeah, but he's right at the front. In which case... Ah, wait a minute. Looking for the wrong one to see.
Right.
And again, it's a family grave.
Yeah.
But the Commonwealth War Graves Commission have added the standard headstone. And it commemorates a man called Joseph Francis Stubbs.
Right.
Who was born in 1919.
Yep.
And he was the first son of Rose and Joseph Henry Stubbs.
Right.
He was generally referred to in the family as Joey. Now, we know a lot more about Joey Stubbs because the last time we did this tour,
right,
someone from his family, his nephew,
right,
his niece, and her son came along looking for them.
Right.
Grave.
Yeah.
He served in the Territorial Army as well before the war.
Yeah.
He was in the 6th Battalion
Right.
of the West Surrey Regiment. And the West Surrey Regiment, this was a large recruiting area for them, and the TA catchment area that he came from was rather higher than Southwark. He passed the initial physicals for joining the army, but he had very poor eyesight and had very thick glasses.
Glasses, okay.
So when he joined up at the beginning of the war, he was assigned as unit cook.
Right, okay.
Keep him out of the way, where he couldn't do any damage. Although being the cook in the army, I think you could do quite a lot of damage, really. But, but on the 3rd of April, 1940, his unit, West Surrey Regiment, 6th Battalion, were sent to France as part of the expeditionary force. And it became part of the Queen's Royal Regiment, which was the full name of the unit.
Okay.
If you know anything about the Northern France campaign in 1940, the British Army was hugely outgunned by the German Blitzkrieg. Cooperation with the French Army was a bit of a disaster, and it all led to an ignominious retreat towards Dunkirk.
Yeah, I watched the movie, great movie, Dunkirk movie,
So on the 20th of May, the Queen's Royal Regiment with Joe Stubbs, cook, with it, was attacked by the German army on the Escaut River. And their combat losses holding off the Germans were so desperately high that the need for riflemen outstripped the need for support personnel.
Right.
So at the age of 21, Joey found himself in one of the rifle companies. So having spent his army career cooking, now they gave him a rifle and said, "I'll hold off the German army."
And you couldn't see nothing. It was very,
you could see very little.
Yeah, little, yeah.
After 2 days of heavy fighting, They were ordered to withdraw towards Saint-Omer,
Right.
and then fell back closer towards the beaches at Dunkirk. But by this time, military discipline is beginning to break down a little bit, and it's kind of every man for himself. And so the records of what was happening, the unit records, weren't being kept up quite as fully as they would otherwise have been. So it all gets a bit patchy then. But this is a photograph of Joey Stubbs.
Right.
And you can see he's got thick glasses on there.
Yeah.
And the man to his left is his best friend in the unit,
Right.
who was known as Titch, obviously because he was shorter than the rest, as you can see from the photograph. At this point, the family history kicks in, as opposed to the regimental histories and all the rest of it. So this is why we know a little bit more about him. So on the 30th of May 1940, Joey Stubbs and his mate Titch found themselves on a beachhead on the coast, and it wasn't clear whether it was just on the way to the beach or whether he'd actually managed to get on a boat.
Right.
But one of the German Stuka bombers, the Ju-87s, dive bombed where Stubbs was, and he was very badly wounded. His mate Titch managed to get Stubbs to safety onto the beaches, ready to be evacuated, whatever. But unfortunately, his wounds were so bad that after 10 days of military action, as opposed to cooking, he died.
Right.
His remains were put on a boat, and they were brought back by the army in a sealed coffin for burial here. And his father, Joseph, bribed the undertakers to unscrew the top of the coffin, to see, to satisfy himself that it really was his son, which is not recommended by the authorities. As you can imagine. So they were buried. He was buried in a grave that his parents had previously purchased as their family plot. But there we are. His unit went on to fight in many actions during the Second World War, but he was one of the casualties from Dunkirk. And his first name is Cleaver. Cleaver Lawrence Alfred Newitt. Hence all the letters before the surname there. He served with the King's Own Royal Regiment, the Lancastrian Regiment. But I don't know which battalion he served in. But the 3rd Battalion of the regiment served only in Britain during the war. And it's you can see the Lion of England, King's Own Royal Regiment. I don't know very much about him. He was a married man. He was 35 years of age when he died. Right. His wife's name is Eva, and she lived in Bermondsey, which I presume is therefore where Newitt came from. But the tragic thing really is, if you look at the date of death, it was the 11th of November 1941, so he died on Remembrance Day.
Armistice Day.
Yeah, Armistice Day. Yeah, so the inscription is it's quite interesting. They're all a standard design, these headstones. Yeah. So they always have the unit crest. Yep. They always have the number, service number, and the rank. You can see there's Lance Corporal there, unless you're an officer. Right. In which case you don't have the number. You have the full rank written out. Right. Then you have the name, and it's usually the initials. And then the surname, and then you have the name of the unit that you served in and the date of death. And then there's always an indication here. You see the cross for all those who were Christians. Okay. But if you were of a different faith, and some of the Commonwealth troops, the Indian Army, that sort of thing, they had different motifs to indicate that. And then you were allowed up to 80 characters on an inscription underneath But
Right.
if you wanted more than 80 characters,
Yeah.
you had to pay extra for them. So the family could choose the wording that went there. And in Newart's case, it says, "Right manfully his cross he bore, and ran his race of torments sore." So there are all sorts of different descriptions. Some of them are more pithy than others. Some of them are more bitter than others as well. But there we are, Lance Corporal Cleaver Lawrence Alfred Newt.
Okay.
So two war graves together here, completely unrelated
Okay.
to each other.
Yeah.
So we'll start with the one on the right here. This is Gunner William Charles James Dalton, D-A-L-T-O-N, and he served in 354 Battery of the 108th Light Anti-Aircraft Regiment of the Royal Artillery. Bit of a mouthful to get in, so hence just the Royal Artillery crest and the mention of the Royal Artillery.
Yeah.
This was an air defence unit.
Right.
It was originally raised as an infantry battalion of the Green Howards in 1940, but it transferred to the Royal Artillery in 1942, and it served with the 52nd Lowland Infantry Division, a Scottish division, and they were being trained together with the anti-aircraft regiment associated with it, emphasis light anti-aircraft, because they were training for mountain warfare and air landing operations.
Right.
Quite which mountains they thought they were going to attack at that time, I don't...
Monte Cassino, maybe?
Um,
The Alps?
Maybe the Italian front later on. But,
Yeah.
bit of forward planning if that's the case. The artillery in Dalton joined the 52nd Division on the 12th of March 1942, and it remained with it for the rest of the war. It trained in the Grampian Mountains, and it reached such high intensity, the training, that it was run by Major General Neil Ritchie, who'd taken command of the division in September following his return from the 8th Army in the Western Desert. And he undertook an exercise called Goliath II, which lasted for 3 weeks in October 1943 under exceptionally harsh conditions in the Grampians. And as a result, the unit, the 52nd, including Dalton's anti-aircraft unit as well, were considered to be, quote, the toughest, fittest and hardest in the British Army.
Right.
Now, bearing in mind that our training exercise was in October 1943,
Yeah.
the citation of Dalton's service says that he died on the 1st of October 1943 as a result of an accident. And even today you sometimes hear of troops on training exercises in Britain who didn't survive it. So I rather suspect that that's what had happened.
Right.
But the sort of gun that Dalton would have manned as part of that unit is the light anti-aircraft unit. It's this sort of Bofors gun, a Swedish weapon.
Right.
So these were mobile anti-aircraft units. They were meant to follow the infantry around and set up to protect them from any enemy aircraft attacks as well. But it's not great fun, is it? Sort of dying on an exercise. Not the most glorious way to go. But the headstone next to it is also a gunner. So this is Lance Bombardier, which is effectively the artillery's equivalent of Lance Corporal in the infantry. Now this is John Houston Jameson, and he was killed on the 25th of October 1942 at the age of 38. Now he's an older
guy,
serviceman, and he served with 179 unit of the 103rd County of London unit. This was an anti-aircraft unit, and they gave letters to the different batteries rather than numbers. So he served with Z battery,
okay.
which was a short-range anti-aircraft system.
Right.
That launched 3-inch or 76mm diameter rockets from ground-based single and multiple launchers. Now we tend to think of rockets,
Yeah.
maybe the Soviet army towards the end of the war or modern war now. But when it says rockets, that's what they look like.
Okay.
So it look just a little bit smaller than perhaps you might imagine. And you can see they fit into these breeches here in little mobile units. So this is a single launcher.
Right.
And this is actually a photograph of Z battery as part of the Home Guard in Merseyside in July 42.
Right.
Because the manning of these Z batteries were transferred to the Home Guard at that time, and troops like Jameson went with them. And that's because they were very light and easy to use, and because the age limit for men being posted to the traditional anti-aircraft units was 40.
Right.
But the anti-aircraft units serving with the Home Guard, you could serve up to the age of 60.
60, right. Dodds Army, Dodds Army.
Absolutely, Jameson was married, and at one time we think he was stationed on Hampstead Heath with his little unit. There's another Lance Bombardier in the same unit who died on the same day as Jameson, and he's buried around here somewhere in the undergrowth as well. So obviously they were hit by a bomb from the enemy aircraft.
Right.
And also from the same unit, there were two other men, Private Wade and Private Rowbottom. They were killed on the 20th and 21st of February 1944. They're also buried at Nunhead.
Right.
So that unit was obviously local.
Local,
to here.
Okay, very interesting.